The train slowed into the city like a breath held too long, exhaled at last. I watched the platform creep toward me in little fits of motion, metal shrieking quietly, a smear of faces through the glass, the flicker of fluorescent lights making everyone look a shade paler. A woman in a yellow coat waved at someone I couldn't see. A boy pressed his palms to the window, fog blooming under his hands like a ghost he almost believed in. I thought I would cry when I saw my station again, the letters still cracked above the archway, the old clock still pretending it knew what time meant. I didn't. After the front, time moved like water inside a broken glass, everywhere at once, and nowhere you could drink from. No one waited for me. That was all right. The uniform made people look and then look away, like I'd brought the weather with me. I stepped down with my duffel over my shoulder and felt land under my boots like a truth I'd been missing, solid and ordinary and unforgiving. Somewhere behind me, a porter was calling out connections, the syllables melting into each other. "You okay?" he asked when he caught me standing too still. I nodded. He nodded back, not believing me but kind enough to pretend. Outside, the evening had already put a hand over the sun. I kept my head down, not because of shame, but because cities always felt too tall when I came home. Buildings leaning in, traffic impatient, posters layered over posters like the past trying to outshout itself. I counted streets the way you count breaths in a panic. 1, 2, 3, almost there. The smell changed as I walked. Train oil to hot bread to rain that hadn't begun yet. By the time I reached our block, the lamps were on. The neighbor's cat glared at me from the fence like I'd interrupted a sermon. Our building looked smaller, or maybe I was larger. The ivy had chewed up more brick, and the front door stuck the way it always had, the wood swollen with every story it had absorbed. I climbed the stairs, each one announcing me, the banister smooth under my palm where everyone who ever lived here had held on for balance or courage or both. On the landing, Mrs. Green's door stood wide. The smell of onions and something sweet drifted out. "Back safe," she said without turning. I heard your step. She didn't come to the doorway. She didn't need to. The walls had ears in this place, and they were generous. At our door, I hesitated. It was the way the light came under it, thin and quiet, like someone sitting still. I slid the key in, felt the old lock consider me and go soft. Nothing had changed, not really. The coat rack waiting like an open hand. The radio with the dent in the grill from the time we laughed too hard and knocked into it. The cup ring on the coffee table we always said we'd sand out and never did. And the shoes. His shoes. Lined up by the mat with the same stubborn neatness that used to make me tease him, the top edges dulled a little, but polished. Somehow that was worse than if they'd been gone. Thomas? The word tore itself out of my throat, a question built from years and letters and the space you leave on the bed for the thing you want to return. No answer. The quiet in our apartment had edges. I set the duffel down and the sound startled me. Too loud for a room with this much memory. There was mail piled on the entry table, a small mountain eroded by days. I touched the top envelope and dust lifted into the air like something relieved to be noticed. Bills? A catalog for tools we couldn't afford? A flyer for new locks we didn't need? The edges of life that collect even when you're away? And then an ivory rectangle, thick and sure of itself, my name printed in the kind of script that makes you behave. It wasn't addressed by hand. It had been run through a machine that thought it knew me. I knew the weight before I turned it over. It had the gravity of bad news dressed as celebration. The seal was gold. I broke it with my nail because I still had a soldier's knife in my bag, and I didn't want to use it on something that already knew it would wound me. The card slid out slow. Heavy paper, 2 names, a date, a time, a place with flowers, and a piano and smiles. I read the groom's name and my blood went out of my hands and into the floor. Thomas Avery Clark cordially invites. Cordially. As if there were a gentle way to rearrange a life. As if kindness were a tone you could print and mail. I read it again because words sometimes change when you look at them too fast. He had the right to our name. I hadn't been gone so long the state could empty it from him. But beneath it was another name. A woman I didn't know. Vows to be spoken next month, at a hall I had never walked into. Beneath a ceiling neither of us had ever looked up at and said, "Someday." The first thing I felt was nothing. That's the trick the body plays when it knows fire is coming. I stood there with that expensive paper in my hands and listened to the radiator tick like a nervous heart. Somewhere a neighbor laughed at a joke that had nothing to do with me. Someone upstairs dropped a pan. The bruise of it landed in our ceiling. The card didn't tremble, which meant I was the one shaking. I put it back in the envelope because I couldn't bear for the words to touch the room. I walked to the sink and turned on the tap and let the water run because it was something alive I could control. The mirror above the sink showed me a woman with new lines where sand and sun and worry had drawn them. Hair a little shorter, because in the field you cut what gets in the way. Eyes that had learned to scan every shadow for a voice that would yell, "Down." She looked like me if I'd met me in a story I didn't believe. The kitchen clock still ticked half a second slow. I stood there and waited for it to catch me, for the sound to make any of this feel like time instead of a trap. A siren wailed somewhere 3 blocks over, and I counted to 4 to see if it would echo. 3, 4, quiet. So not a drill then. In the window above the sink, the glass still held the faint scratch where he'd tried to coax a stuck latch loose, and I'd said, "Leave it. We like how it sounds when it opens." And he'd nodded because he liked me deciding how the house felt, even when he didn't understand why. People think memory is a gift. It is, but sometimes it's a knife with your fingerprints already on it. I held the counter until the counter held me back. I made tea because that's what you do when there's nothing to do. The kettle whistled its thin, steady grief. I poured too fast and scalded my thumb and welcomed the sting. It proved the body still knew where it ended. I set the invitation in the fruit bowl because there wasn't any fruit. Hunger came and went like a careless tide. I don't know how long I stood there before the door opened. The light moved again and the air bent. His key, I'd know the sound of it anywhere. He stepped in and didn't see me at first. He looked thinner in the way men look when they have been trying on a new life, and it doesn't fit yet. He had a coat I didn't recognize, a haircut that belonged to a different barber. The way his shoulders carried themselves said he'd been practicing. "Lena?" His voice didn't break. Mine did. "I'm here." He looked at me then, really looked, the way people in photographs look when they're trying to be better for the person holding the camera. The first thing that crossed his face was relief, and I was grateful for that even as it hurt me. The second was caution. The third was a brief, unguarded flash of something like joy he couldn't help. And that's when I remembered why I had loved him in the first place. His happiness had always been a thing that apologized for nothing. "You're back," he said, stepping forward and stopping as if there were a wire across the room only he could see. "When?" "An hour ago." I nodded toward the table. "Your letter arrived first." He didn't turn. His eyes moved in that direction without his body, like a dog waiting for permission. "You saw it." I did. I kept my voice steady with both hands. I don't know if he heard the front in me. I don't know if he would have cared if he had. He closed the door behind him slow. The shared air in the room changed temperature. I didn't know how to... He swallowed. There isn't a word for this that doesn't sound like it was designed to get me forgiven. "You didn't think I'd come home. No point making it smoother than it was. I didn't know when you would. Or if you would. They told me..." He stopped. "No more of the things they told me. I'll tell you what I did." He set his hat on the hook with a care that felt like a prayer. He came to the other side of the table and placed his fingers on the chair, back the way you touch the shoulder of someone who might run. The silence gathered itself and sat politely among us. In the hall, someone's radio found a song and lost it again. "I waited," he said, and the word had years in it. At first it was all waiting. "For your letters. For your commander's letters. For the ones that said nothing except the things they could say without telling me what they needed to say. I wrote to you so much I started repeating myself. Do you know how many ways there are to say come back? I found more than I thought. I read them. I had a bundle in my bag, ribbon and creases, oil from my fingers darkening the edges where I held on. I read them when I shouldn't have. I read them when the ground was shaking. I read them when I needed to believe that if I did this, I would get to be someone's again. He closed his eyes. "Then you know it was never..." He stopped correcting his sentence and let it stand where it had faltered. He opened his eyes again. 9 months ago, the letter came with a different seal. Do you want me to say what it said? Or do you want me to tell you what it did to me? Tell me what it did. It made me make a plan. He flattened his palm on the table as if the wood could hold him to the truth. Not because I wanted to leave you. Because I couldn't stand the not knowing. Because the human heart is a disobedient animal, and if you don't give it a task, it will make one up. And the task you gave it was a wedding. He flinched, just barely. It was a promise to not be alone. It was a promise to stop waking up to the sound of your voice in a room that did not deserve it. It was cowardice, dressed as hope. He looked older when he said that, not from years, from the cost of telling the truth. What did the letter say? I wasn't sure if I wanted to hear it or see if he could say it. That you were missing. That your unit had been separated and the records were unclear. He swallowed to make space for the word that came next. Presumed, the window rattled. A bus went by. The city answered our conversation with its usual indifference. He put both hands on the back of the chair, then let them go, as if there were something on his palms he did not want to leave there. That's when I wrote to her, he said. And the pronoun made a shape in the room we had to walk around. Not because she was you, not because she could be, because she was the only person I knew who had survived losing someone and still got up in the morning and made coffee without asking the day permission to not hurt her. He gave me her name then, and it sounded like a decision and a confession at once. I didn't hate the name. That almost made it worse. You didn't cancel it, I said. There are sentences that should not need to be said aloud to be true, but the world does not run on mercy. I couldn't. His voice was sand and apology. Everything had been printed. Families told. Money paid. And then the station called and said there was a manifest. And your name was on it. And I couldn't move, Lena. I couldn't make the phone call that would undo a life without making the one that would ask you for the one I'd let go of in my head. So I did nothing. Which is a decision, and I know it. You could have waited by the platform. I did. Every day this week, morning and evening, I stood there like a ghost with a timetable. He gave me a small, helpless smile that didn't ask me to forgive it. I missed you by an hour. We stood at the table like it was a border the war had placed in our home. The invitation watched us quietly, patient as paper. My hands wanted to do something, the old domestic gestures that say we are still human here. Make tea, fold a napkin, smooth a sleeve. Instead, I pressed my thumb to the place his name was printed and felt the ink hold. I went for you, I said, because if I didn't say it now, there would be no language left that belonged to me. I did the thing that scared me because I believed you were the part of my life the fear did not get to have. He bowed his head like someone had struck him and he thought he deserved it. I know. And you went for the life that scared you less. That's true, he said. And untrue. And both at once. I went for a version of the life where I could breathe. I went because I could not stand the idea that the last thing between us would be silence and a flag. I went because I am not as brave as the woman I loved. He lifted his eyes, met mine. Love. I mean love. He corrected the grammar of his heart in front of me and did not look away. The kettle hissed. I had never turned it off. I moved past him and turned the knob to quiet it. He stepped aside. The choreography we had learned from years of two people in a small kitchen. All the old dances still in our bodies, even when the music had become unrecognizable. I don't have a right to ask you anything, he said to the floor. But I'll ask, what do you want me to do? The answer did not arrive like lightning. It came like a tide hitting a familiar shore. The uniform on my back felt heavier than the bag I had dropped. I watched my hand reach for a cup and my other hand refused to give it one. I want, I said. And the word felt like a foreign coin I wasn't sure the machine would accept. I want this not to have happened. I let the smallness of that stand, because small truths save you from lying. And because it did, I want you to choose in a way that doesn't ask me to bless your not choosing. He nodded, and it was not the nod of a man relieved to be given instructions. It was the nod of a man who had already known what the answer would be and had still hoped to avoid it. He looked at the invitation and then at me. I'll cancel it, he said. I should have yesterday. I should have when the manifest said your name, as if the city had decided to learn how to speak mercy. He swallowed again. I will call her and tell her that I am— He paused long enough to consider the word. I am not who I thought I could be. No. The word surprised both of us. He looked up sharply. Don't cancel it for me, I said. Cancel it because it is a cruelty. To leave anyone standing in a hall waiting for a life that you are still auditioning for. I set the cup down and stepped back from the table so I could see all of him at once, the boy who had kissed me on the first snowfall, the man who had learned how to fix a window latch, the human who had been told that I was lost and had gone looking for air where he could find it. Then go away from here. For a while. Let the air decide what it wants to do with us. That sounds like waiting. It is. I let myself be unfair. It's my turn. He took a breath like someone preparing to dive. Okay. He picked up the invitation and slid it back into the envelope with all the care of putting a letter back into a dead man's pocket. He didn't reach for me. He didn't ask to touch my hand. He took his hat from the hook and opened the door and looked at me as if this were the only room where he had ever told the truth. I will write you, he said and smiled once, tired and unhandsome with honesty. Every way that isn't a lie. When the door shut, the light changed again and the air went still. The kettle clicked as it cooled. The radio upstairs found its song. I put my palm on the spot where the envelope had been and felt the wood warm under it. My thumb still stung where the tea had scalded me. I pressed it to my mouth, tasted metal, and laughed once, a thin sound that belonged to a woman who had just found both an ending and not one. Night arrived the way it always does, indifferent to the news. I undid my laces and lined my boots beside his shoes, a soldier's joke that no one would hear. I took my jacket off and draped it over the chair he had not sat in. I washed my hands and watched the water go clouded and then clear. I lay down on our bed and left space for a person I did not recognize yet. The me who would wake in this apartment and decide who she was without permission. Outside, rain finally began. It tapped the windows like someone polite. I thought I heard the station whistle for the last train. Or maybe that sound lives in you when you've left too often. I closed my eyes and saw the front again. Not the worst of it, but a field at dusk. The sky blue as a bruise and kind in a way I didn't trust. The ground had held me then. The ground held me now. When sleep finally came, it was a shallow tide. It left me at dawn with grit in my eyes and the certainty of a first step. On the table, the invitation-shaped absence was a neat rectangle in the dust. I traced it with my finger and left a wider space. I boiled the kettle and this time turned it off before it wailed. I wrote my mother a letter I wouldn't send, telling her I had done something hard and that I hoped it had been the right kind of hard. I took a pen and a clean postcard and wrote a sentence that felt like a door I could walk through. I returned from the front and found an invitation addressed to a woman I could not be. Today, I will begin being the one who answers my own. I propped the card by the sink like a promise. I took my duffel and unpacked it one piece at a time, putting each thing where it belonged. When I pulled the last letter from the bottom, his handwriting familiar enough to feel like skin, I sat down and read it again. The one that had made me believe in mornings. The sentences still worked. They always would, but they were not the only ones I could write. By noon, the rain had shifted to a finer patience. I put on my coat and stepped into it. The city smelled like wet bread and iron and beginnings. Down on the corner, the postbox waited, red and steady. I dropped the postcard in and listened for it to land. The sound was small. The sound was everything. I didn't leave the apartment the next day. The clock did its soft wrong tick. The radiator breathed. The city tried out 3 different kinds of rain, and then kept the one that matched my window. I kept expecting the world to insist I choose something. Rage, collapse, sleep. But the hours slipped past like strangers who'd been warned not to make eye contact. By mid-afternoon, I gave in to rest and slept on top of the covers, boots off, jacket on, the way you nap at the edge of a mission, half ready to be a person, half ready to be a shadow. I dreamt of the field hospital where the canvas shuddered in the wind like a living lung. Clark's name, Thomas, but out there everyone was last named, lived in a corner of my head where I stored safe things: dry socks, taped letters, the word home. In the dream, I opened that corner, and inside was an ivory card with a gold seal that broke under my thumb. When I woke, it was evening again, the room blue with the kind of light that doesn't forgive anything. I made toast because that's what my hands knew: heat, knife, butter, small mercy spread to the edges. I folded the blanket on the back of the couch the way he used to, 2 neat squares, then a third, and the muscle memory made me angrier than headlines ever had. I put the blanket down wrong on purpose and felt childish and relieved. Mrs. Green knocked once, then twice, with the pattern she used for people who might be sleeping. I opened the door and she didn't say I looked terrible, which is how you know someone has loved people through real trouble. She had a casserole dish wrapped in a towel that was older than both of us. "You don't have to talk," she said, "and I'll pretend not to listen." She set the dish on the counter and fussed with the towel as if its corners were a conversation starting and stopping. "You'll need forks. I forgot to bring any." She opened the drawer, found ours, nodded like she approved. "I saw him leave," she said softly. "He looked like a man who'd lost a word and didn't know how to ask anyone for it." "Me too," I said. She didn't pry, which is also love. She squeezed my shoulder and left. When the door clicked shut, the apartment found its shape again. I ate standing up, the way you do when your body doesn't trust chairs. After I wrote and tore up 3 letters, to him, to the woman whose name I hadn't earned the right to hate, to my past self who had fallen asleep to the rhythm of distant guns and the promise of a future with a porch, I finally wrote one to no one and left it on the counter. You don't have to be graceful to tell the truth. You don't have to be nice to survive it. At some point the phone rang. I let it. Then I answered because cowards hide for good reasons, and brave people hide for the same ones. "Lena?" His voice had edges. "I'm here." I called her. Each word sounded like a board laid across a gap. I told her everything. I should have done it before. I told her I didn't cancel because you asked me not to use you as the reason. I told her I was the reason. He swallowed. I could hear it travel. She said thank you for not lying with flowers. Then she hung up. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it, which is a cruel, clean feeling. "So am I. I'll be out of the flat for a while. I won't come by unless you say." "Don't," I said. "Not yet." "Okay." He waited. "I'll write." "Write to yourself first," I said, and the advice surprised us both. "Tell the truth to someone who can't give you points for it." A small sound escaped him, not quite a laugh. "I will." A pause. "I'm sorry for the letter with the seal that made me a coward. I'm sorry for the war that made me someone who reads letters like maps." We were quiet together for a breath. "Good night, Thomas." "Good night, Lena." When the line went dead, the room felt bigger. Or maybe I was finally taking up my size inside it. The next morning, a familiar ache sat under my ribs. The one that says, do something before your thoughts do you. I showered, shaved the back of my neck with the steadiness I'd learned under bad light, put on jeans that remembered my body, and a sweater that didn't ask me to be lovely. I laced my boots with the military knot I'd never unlearn, and stepped into the bright cold. At the corner, the newsstand man squinted at me over his paper. "You're the one with the postcards," he said. I must have looked blank. "You used to come by and buy 3 at a time." "Always the skyline, never the beach." I needed the lines, I said. "Not the horizon. Welcome home, soldier." He said it without ceremony, which is the only way you survive that sentence. At the post office, I stood in line behind a woman mailing a hat to someone she loved. When it was my turn, I slid a small envelope across the counter, addressed to a stationer uptown. Inside was his invitation, and the single sentence I had written on my own card and copied for the archive of things that make you breathe. I returned from the front and found an invitation addressed to a woman I could not be. I asked the clerk for tracking because sometimes you need proof that letting go actually went somewhere. From there, my feet invented an errand. The Veterans Resource Office a bus ride away. On a street with trees, learned to be patient with car doors. The lobby smelled like coffee that had apologized too many times. A volunteer in a cardigan took my name and asked if I wanted a seat or a walk. Walk, I said, and she led me around the block while I talked about nothing and everything. The front and the not front. The way applause felt wrong and silence felt worse. The hard landing of coming home to find the ground remodeled. You don't have to be grateful for what hurt you, she said, and I tucked the sentence into my coat. Inside, a counselor with eyes that remembered things asked if I had support. A neighbor, I said. A man whose name turns every room into math. A habit of boiling water. That'll do for today, he said. Come back before it doesn't. On the way out, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I answered because I was tired of running from vowels. Is this Elena Clark? A woman's voice, careful but unafraid. She said her name, and it was the one from the card. I'm sorry to call you. I thought about writing, but writing lets people rehearse. Yes, I said. Talking makes you fall. She laughed, surprised at the truth of it. I don't want to hurt you, she said. You already did, I said. And because she had not earned the cruelty of a clean wound, I added, not on purpose. Not on purpose, she repeated. He told me you were missing. He told me he was not who he thought he was when he thought you were gone. He told me yesterday that he was yours. He didn't say it like property. He said it like orbit. She exhaled, and it sounded like she had put down a box. I told him to go. Thank you, I said. It felt like shaking hands with a version of myself I had escaped by inches. Are you all right? I will be, she said. I'm good at building things out of what's left. A quiet. I hoped you would be the one to say the word home again. I closed my eyes and let the old ache pass by. Me too. Don't forgive him quickly, she said. Make him learn the work. It isn't for you. It's for him. Noted, I said. And we were quiet there together, strangers who had both chosen not to lie. I'm sorry, I added, because the sentence wanted both directions. For the part of this that will knock on your door at night. I have a porch light, she said, and friends who will sit on the steps until it goes quiet. She hesitated. Be well, Elena. You too. We hung up before either of us could get sentimental and ruin the dignity of what we had just done. I spent the afternoon applying for a job at the VA hospital 2 districts over, because the only thing that made sense was to stay useful where pain knew its own name. The application asked for skills. I wrote triage, listening, telling the truth without breaking the room, doing what needs doing when the person who should be doing it is busy pretending they can't. Under references, I wrote names of nurses whose laughter had sounded like truce. Near dusk, the sky tried on winter. I took the long way home and passed the park where he had proposed, if you can call it that, on a Tuesday with no flowers because he had never been good at choreography. Marry me, he'd said, and when I laughed, he'd looked worried, as if that was the wrong answer. And then I'd said yes. Of course, what else would it be? And he'd laughed too, and the pigeons had lifted like confetti. I stood there and let the scene be what it was, beautiful and past. I didn't revise it into a warning. I didn't rerun it as a trap. I nodded to the version of us for whom a Tuesday had been enough and walked on. Back at the building, Mrs. Green had left me a note on the mat. If you need to use words without witnesses, my hallway is excellent for that. I smiled despite everything and slid the note into the drawer where I keep proof that the world can be kind without asking to be thanked. The apartment smelled like clean air. No tea, no panic. On the table sat a small stack of mail from the day, a utilities bill, a flyer for a film that made heartbreak look pretty, and a plain envelope with government edges. Inside was the separation packet I'd requested months ago and never opened. I had printed the form on a day when the sky had been too blue for how my stomach felt. Then I'd stuffed it under the mattress like a superstition. Now, here it was again, as if time had a sense of humor. I put the forms on the table precisely parallel to the wood grain, then turned them diagonal because straight lines made me feel like I was being graded. I didn't fill them out. I didn't set them on fire. I let them exist. Choosing not to choose is its own version of a choice, but sometimes it's mercy. Late, the phone rang again. This time I didn't brace or bargain. Lena, he said. The sound of my name in his mouth made the wall tilt for a second, then right itself. Thomas. I'm at my brother's for a while. I wanted to tell you that I've started writing what you asked. To myself, a breath. It's ugly. And it's the first honest thing I've done in months. Good, I said, and meant it. Don't send it to me. Not yet. I won't. He paused. I found your postcard in the bin, the invitation you sent back. I didn't open it. I took it to the river. I read the sentence aloud, and a man walking his dog looked at me like I was losing my mind. Then I threw it in. The card sank. The envelope floated. He made a sound like he might laugh at himself someday. I pushed it under. Small mercies, I said. I loved you, he said. You love me, I corrected. Love doesn't get to change tense just because it's inconvenient. Silence. Then softly. Yes. Then go be good at that somewhere else for a while, I said. Without me. Learn how to carry it without handing it to the nearest woman who looks like she knows what to do with heavy things. He let out a breath that might have been the beginning of relief. Okay. After I hung up, I stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room and let the day move through me. It did not knock me down. It did not lift me up. It kept going, which is how you wrestle time into letting you keep it. I slept. This time, the dream was simple. A train moving through a field, windows lit, everyone inside reading something that told them who they were. Somewhere, a conductor walked the aisle and collected their names. When he reached me, I handed him a blank card. He punched a hole in the corner and nodded as if I'd given the right answer. Morning brought a sky the color of a decision. I boiled the kettle. I turned it off before it whistled. I wrote to the VA and said I could start whenever the paperwork finished dashing itself against the rocks of bureaucracy. I made a list of groceries that had nothing to do with heartbreak and everything to do with feeding a person who had to keep standing up. Eggs, oranges, soap, bread, tulips, if the price hadn't lost its mind. On my way out, I passed the mirror by the door and caught my reflection. I didn't look brave. I looked awake. It was enough. Down on the street, the city didn't know how close it had come to being asked to vote on my life. It did what cities do. Steam from grates, a man whistling off-key, kids racing leaves to the curb. I put my collar up against the wind and let the corner decide whether I went left or right. Left felt like yesterday. Right felt like a small new path someone had chalked in the dark and hoped would still be there by morning. I went right. 2. Weeks after the call, the city began pretending it was spring. The streets thawed into puddles that looked like mercy, and the wind stopped biting long enough for me to stop flinching when doors closed. I had started working at the VA hospital, 3 days a week, mostly triage and paperwork that taught me how many ways people can come home and still be lost. The patients didn't ask questions that wanted answers. They asked questions that kept them company. When does it stop hurting? Do you still see it when you blink? What did you dream about last night? I never lied, but I learned to give answers that could live beside their pain. In the break room, the coffee tasted like aluminum and exhaustion. A nurse named Evelyn slipped a biscuit into my hand each morning like it was medicine. "You've got the quiet kind of tired," she said once. "That's the worst kind, because it looks like you're fine." She was right. The world thanks the loud kind of pain and forgets the ones who whisper through it. Every day I told myself not to think about Thomas. Every day the city built some small monument to failure that looked too much like him. Someone helping an old woman cross the street, a man folding a newspaper the way he used to fold letters, the smell of cedar from a shop door that could have been our living room. I let those ghosts walk beside me without asking for directions. Then, one Friday evening, there was a letter in my mailbox. No return address. Just my name in handwriting that didn't try to be neat. I stood there in the hallway until Mrs. Green's door opened and her cat brushed against my leg. "If you're going to read it," she said, "do it sitting down." I took her advice. Inside the envelope was a single page, folded twice. "Lena, I've been writing every day, as you told me. Most of it shouldn't be read by anyone. Some of it doesn't make sense until I see your face in it. You said love doesn't get to change tense. I think you're right. The present tense is heavy, but it's honest. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking to tell you something that happened before the invitation, before the war even decided what to do with us. When you left, I became afraid of silence. I filled it with noise, and when that ran out, I filled it with plans. The woman you spoke to, she was kind. She deserved something unbroken. I tried to be that and couldn't. You didn't come home to betrayal. You came home to my cowardice pretending to be love. If you ever need to hate me, I'll understand. If you ever need to see me, I'll be here. If you never do either, I'll still be waiting. Not for permission, just for peace." T.I. folded it carefully. The page had a weight to it that no stationery could explain. I didn't cry. The tears had done their tour months ago. I sat there until the hallway light timer clicked off and left me in the dark. Then I took the letter into my apartment, put it on the table beside my mother's old vase, and left it unopened again for the rest of the night, as if waiting for a new ending to grow. The next morning, the hospital was short-staffed. A man came in shouting in a language Payne had invented. His leg shook so violently we had to pin it down to keep the needle steady. Afterward, when he finally slept, I sat beside him and counted the rhythm of his breathing. 4 in, 6 out. The same numbers Thomas used to use when he couldn't sleep, and I'd trace his ribs like they were music. I got up, washed my hands, and looked at myself in the mirror above the sink. "You can miss someone," I whispered, "and still not want to go back." The mirror fogged and didn't argue. On my lunch break, I walked to the post office again, but not to send anything. I wanted to prove to myself I could stand where I had last let go and not dissolve. The clerk recognized me. "Still tracking that letter?" she asked. "No," I said. "Just making sure it really left." "It did," she said. "Everything goes somewhere, even if we don't get to know where." Outside, I bought a newspaper and read none of it. The front page talked about peace talks overseas. Peace always made the news when it wasn't real yet. That night, another letter waited under my door. It was shorter. "You once said the only real promise we made was to come back alive. You kept yours. I'm still learning how." I didn't answer right away. I let a week go by. I filled my apartment with the kind of small noises that make you belong somewhere. The kettle, the radio, the scrape of a chair leg against the floor. Then I sat down with my own paper. "Thomas, I don't hate you. Hate is a full-time job, and I've already retired from war. I don't forgive you either. Forgiveness is an ending, and we're still somewhere in the middle. But I see you. And I know that seeing yourself in your mistakes is harder than looking away. That's something. Maybe it's enough for now. L." I didn't send it. I put it in the same drawer as his first letter. The truth doesn't always need an audience. Weeks passed. My routine began to breathe differently. I learned my favorite. Hallway at the hospital. The one where the light hit the tiles like kindness. I learned Evelyn's daughter's name and the way she said mama on the phone like a song. I learned that healing wasn't a finish line. It was a conversation with pain that kept changing the subject. Then, one afternoon, I found him standing outside the hospital gate. No warning, no phone call, just him, coat collar up, hands in pockets, looking like the weather couldn't quite decide on him. He saw me before I saw him, and when our eyes met, the air rearranged itself. Not romance. Recognition. "I didn't know if you'd talk to me," he said. His voice had less gravity now, as if he'd put something down. "I'm not sure either," I said. He smiled faintly. "That's fair. You shouldn't be here." "I know." He looked at the steps. "I needed to give you something." He held out a thin notebook, edges worn, pages bent from use. "It's the letters," he said. "All the ones I wrote to myself. The ones that don't deserve an answer." I didn't take it at first. "Why give them to me?" "Because I don't want to keep them as proof," he said. "I want to remember them as the work." The wind lifted between us, cold enough to make my eyes water. I took the notebook. "Don't read them yet," he said. "Wait until you can do it without editing me." "Maybe that'll be never," I said. "Then it'll stay unread," he replied. "That's fine." For a long moment we just stood there, the city around us loud and ordinary. Finally, I said, "Are you still marrying her?" He shook his head. "No. She sent me a painting instead. Said it was a picture of silence. I think she meant goodbye." "I'm glad," I said, and I was. He looked up at the hospital sign, then back at me. "You look alive," he said. "I am." And for the first time, saying it didn't sound like a reminder, it sounded like a fact. He nodded, smiled once, small and true, and left. That night, I opened the notebook. The first page read, "I am trying to become the kind of man who doesn't wait for women to tell him who he is." I closed it again and put it on the table, next to my tea. The clock ticked its half-beat rhythm. Outside, the city exhaled. I didn't know what would happen next, if he would write again, if I would answer, if this was a middle or a beginning disguised as an ending. But I knew this much. I had come home from 2 wars. One with a country, one with love, and I was finally learning how to win both by not fighting anymore. Spring arrived late that year, as if time itself had been afraid to move forward. The city wore its green reluctantly, small bursts of color between old soot and patients. I was still at the VA, still pretending I could measure healing by attendance sheets and medication schedules. But something inside me had shifted, not healed, not broken, just quieter, as though the part of me that had lived in waiting had finally learned to rest. Thomas didn't write again, and neither did I. It was the kindest kind of silence, not absence, but understanding. The notebook he'd given me sat on the corner of my table. I never opened it past the first page. Sometimes I dusted it without meaning to, as if care were an instinct you couldn't unlearn. Every now and then, when the light hit it at the right angle, I'd see the faint imprint of his handwriting on the cover, as though the words themselves were trying to escape. It was Evelyn who told me, one ordinary Tuesday, that there'd been an accident. She came into the ward, her eyes soft, her mouth already apologizing. "Lena," she said gently, "you might want to sit." But I didn't. She told me he'd been driving north, somewhere near the cliffs outside Brighton. His car had gone off the road. Not fast, not violent, just wrong. A guardrail, a patch of black ice, the kind of small mistake that changes everything. He'd been taken to the local hospital, alive but barely conscious. "He asked for you," she said. "They found your name in his wallet." For a moment, the room tilted, like the ground had forgotten its job. The patience blurred. The smell of antiseptic burned sharp in my throat. I didn't ask how she knew. I didn't even pack. I just went. The train to Brighton hummed like a pulse too tired to stay steady. I sat by the window and watched the countryside turn itself inside out. Fields greening, trees half awake, the world still pretending winter had the right to linger. Every mile closer felt like a rehearsal for a goodbye I didn't know how to give. I tried to tell myself this wasn't a story about punishment, that people don't get accidents for atonement. But the thought came anyway, uninvited. Maybe the universe isn't cruel. Maybe it's just thorough. At the hospital, they let me in without questions. His name still carried weight, and mine still carried history. The nurse at the desk said, "He's been asking for someone with your eyes." I didn't know what that meant until I saw him. He looked smaller, but not weaker, just contained. The kind of smallness that comes from someone who's stopped fighting gravity. Tubes, bandages, machines breathing beside him, the modern chorus of survival. But his face was still his, softened by something that wasn't pain. Peace, maybe. Resignation. A man finally speaking the language his heart had been learning in secret. When he saw me, the smallest smile broke through the oxygen line. "You came," he whispered. "You asked," I said. He blinked slowly, as if the sentence had cost him something precious. "I didn't think I was allowed to." "Allowed to what?" "To ask for you again, Thomas," I said. And then nothing. Because what do you say to someone who taught you how to love and how to lose in the same breath? He motioned weakly toward the chair. "Sit, please. The nurses think I'm waiting for the chaplain." I sat. "Maybe I am the chaplain." "Then forgive me," he said, voice breaking into a quiet laugh. "Not my department anymore," I replied, smiling despite myself. For a long time, we didn't speak. The machines filled the silence, polite but unrelenting. I could hear rain against the window, the steady drip of healing trying to convince the body to stay. Finally, he said, "I never finished writing to myself. There were still things I couldn't say without you here to hear them." "Then say them now." He hesitated. "I wanted to tell you that the day I sent that invitation wasn't the day I stopped loving you. It was the day I stopped believing I deserved to. That's worse. People think betrayal is a choice, but sometimes it's cowardice pretending to be mercy." I felt something deep inside me loosen, not forgiveness, but the beginning of it. "I know," I said. "I think I always did. I thought you'd hate me. I tried. It didn't take." He smiled again, small, grateful. "You were always bad at hate." I learned from the best. We sat there, two soldiers who had run out of enemies. I reached into my bag. "I brought this," I said, pulling out the notebook. "You left it with me." He looked at it with a strange tenderness. "Did you read it?" "Only the first page. That's the only one that mattered." I opened it, turned it around, and read aloud what I already knew. "I am trying to become the kind of man who doesn't wait for women to tell him who he is." His eyes closed, as if hearing it in my voice made it real. "Did you?" I asked. "Did you become him?" He thought about it, and that was his answer. "I think I tried," he said finally. "But I ran out of time to finish." The nurse came in quietly, adjusted a monitor, smiled at us both. "He's stronger today," she said gently. "But you shouldn't stay too long," I nodded. Thomas reached for my hand. The weight of his fingers was feather light, the kind of touch that knows it doesn't have many left. "Lena," he said. "If I don't wake up, you will. But if I don't?" He smiled faintly. "Then this will have been enough. You being here, it feels like the end of a letter I never sent." I pressed his hand between mine. "Then let's end it properly." I leaned closer, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "Good night." "Thomas." His lips moved, maybe to say my name, maybe to say something that only the soul knows how to finish. And then he slept. He didn't die that night. Life, in its strange mercy, gave him a little longer. Long enough to recover just enough to live differently. Long enough for me to understand that this wasn't tragedy, it was transition. He was discharged 2 weeks later. We wrote letters again, short ones, honest ones. Nothing like before. Just notes left at the front desk, sentences that didn't need replies. The sea looks different when you stop expecting it to remember you. Thank you for teaching me how to look at rain and not see regret. And finally, you can stop writing now. I've learned how to listen to the quiet. The last letter came a month later, addressed in handwriting steadier than I remembered. Inside, one line, "I'm moving to the coast. Don't follow. Just know that every sunrise is yours too." I read it once, smiled, and put it with the others. Then I closed the drawer and walked to the window. The sky outside was turning to gold. For the first time, I didn't think of war. I didn't think of loss. I thought of peace, stubborn and small and finally mine. Morning comes softer now. Not the kind of morning that demands things from you. No sirens, no drills, no letters sliding under doors like verdicts. Just light, slow and gold, leaking through the curtains like forgiveness that finally found the right house. It's been nearly a year since that hospital morning. A year since Thomas looked at me and asked for nothing more than to be seen one last time without history in the way. He kept his word. He moved to the coast. He didn't write again. I didn't either. Some endings are so clean they don't need punctuation. Sometimes I take the early train south, just to stand on the cliffs and watch the same horizon he must see. The sea isn't sentimental. It doesn't care what it took or what it gave back. It keeps breathing in, breathing out, steady as the human heart tries to be. The first time I went, I thought I might see him there, a figure in a gray coat, notebook in hand, hair blown by the wind like an apology trying to find shape. I didn't, but I found something else, quiet, the kind that fills your lungs instead of your silence. I threw a small pebble into the waves. It sank without ceremony, no echo, no sign, just a ripple that caught the light and disappeared. I remember thinking, that's what we were, not gone, just absorbed. That day I stopped trying to understand love as permanence. Love is weather. It visits, it ruins, it nourishes, and then it moves on. You don't curse the rain for ending. You thank it for arriving at all. At the VA, I started running a writing group for the new arrivals, men and women still caught halfway between survival and living. We sit in a circle with cheap notebooks and lukewarm coffee and talk about nothing in particular until someone accidentally tells the truth. One afternoon, a boy no older than 20 read a piece called "The Ones Who Came Home Twice." It was about how coming back isn't a single act. It's something you have to do every morning until it stops hurting. When he finished, he looked up and asked, "Does it ever stop?" I told him the truth. No, but it gets quieter. And one day you realize quiet is all you ever wanted. He nodded like someone who understood too early. After the session, I stayed behind to clean the mugs and wipe the tables. Evelyn came in, carrying a bouquet of tulips from her garden. She set them in front of me and said, "For your apartment. It needs new color." I looked at the flowers, open, unashamed, alive, and said, "So do I." A few weeks later, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a thin envelope wrapped in brown paper. No handwriting I recognized, no clues. Just a single folded page and something heavier beneath it. The note was brief. "Dear Lena, if you're reading this, it means the sea has finished its work. Don't mourn it. I'm not lost, just carried further out. Thank you for teaching me how to tell the truth before I ran out of breath." Underneath the letter was his ring, the simple silver band I'd taken off his finger the night before I left for the front, the one I never returned. It was warm, as if it had only just been held. There was no date. No signature beyond the initial. But it didn't matter. I didn't call anyone. I didn't cry. I just walked to the window and held the ring against the morning light. It caught the sun and threw it back in a quiet flash, like a heartbeat remembering itself. Weeks later, I took the ring to the cliffs. The sky was wide and bright, the wind sharp enough to remind me I was alive. I stood where the earth gives way to air and said his name once, softly, to the sea. Then I opened my hand. The ring slipped free and caught the light one last time before the water took it. No ceremony, no prayer. Just the sound of waves meeting what was always theirs. I stood there until the sun went down, the sky burning itself into color, and I realized that grief wasn't a wound. It was proof of living. When I returned to the city, I noticed things I hadn't before. The sound of pigeons on the roof, the way Mrs. Green's cat still waited at my door like an old friend with new gossip. The kettle's whistle, softer, maybe because I'd finally learned to turn it off before it screamed. My apartment looked smaller, but kinder. I bought fresh sheets. I painted one wall yellow. I planted tulips on the balcony, the same color as the ones Evelyn had given me. One morning, I found myself laughing, not at anything, just at the fact that I still could. It startled me, the sound. It felt like sunlight inside my ribs. That evening, I took out one of my old letters, the one I'd never sent, and read it aloud to the empty room. Dear Thomas, if love was a battle, we both survived it wrong. But I think survival was the point. Thank you for coming home even when you couldn't stay. Eli folded it and tucked it into the back of his notebook, closing it like a door finally ready to lock. This morning, the sun rose early, spilling light through the lace curtains. I made coffee, sat by the window, and watched the city wake, people crossing streets, buses sighing, the world remembering how to begin again. And for the first time since the war, I realized I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for a letter, not for a voice, not even for forgiveness. Peace doesn't announce itself. It doesn't knock. It just sits beside you one morning, uninvited but welcome, holding a cup of coffee and saying, "You made it." I took a sip, smiled, and said back, "Yes, I did."